Welcome to this sixth video overall and the third discussion around the theme, the history of Christianity in Africa as part of our Church in Africa series. Again, I'm Father Paul Coleman, theology professor here at Notre Dame. Really good to be with you. Today, I want to talk about some of the features of the Christianity in Africa that are traceable to some of the history we've been looking at. I'm going to focus on three things. One would be the prophetic dynamism of Christianity in Africa. Another would be the reality of African initiated or independent churches. And the third will be the remarkable resilience in the face of resistance by so many courageous and faith-filled African Christians. First, with regard to prophetic dynamism, it's pretty clear that very early on, African Christians of a variety of sorts, North Africa, in the Portuguese period and in the modern missionary period, were able to interpret the scriptures in ways that helped them appreciate the hypocrisy sometimes of the Europeans who came to bring them the message, or of their Christian leaders who might have been belonging to their own ethnic group, and call people out on it. There are many examples of this, but one of the most famous is an early 18th century movement in the Congolese Catholic Kingdom, led by a remarkable woman, Dona Beatriz Quimpavita, who, following kind of indigenous religious convictions and patterns, saw herself possessed by Saint Anthony, and who preached national unity and peace at a time of great political unrest. She's a complicated figure. She was burned at the stake as a heretic. Yet these days, Angolan Christians and Angolan patriots look back on her as someone who anticipated their kind of zeal for independence and their zeal for their own creativity, and also a deep woman of faith. She clearly was motivated by belief in Jesus, even if it was a complex kind of a historical record. The book is really worth reading. A second abiding feature, I would say, would be African independent churches. In some ways, the Congolese Saint Anthony represents this as well, and Northern Africa, even in the ancient period, was the source of new African movements that became independent from the churches as they developed and connected to Rome or Constantinople or other forms of Christianity. But starting in the modern missionary period, there have been a number of African independent churches called AICs. And these take a variety of forms. Some of them, the earliest ones especially, were really just very much like missionary churches, except that they allowed Africans to be in leadership. There was a growing frustration as Africans grew educated and as they recognized spiritual gifts in one another, that European missionaries clung tightly to the leadership in their churches. So resistance to African leadership among European missionaries was one of the causes of these African independent churches, most assuredly. Another would be the reality of colonial exploitation, which missionaries seemed to be supporting and which were linked to missionary Christianity in its various forms as people lost land, capacity for self-governance. And so some independent churches clearly arose in this way. And over time, some of these African independent churches certainly stopped resembling their missionary forebears and took on much more obviously features of African cultures and ethnicities. They're very interesting. And the capacity to judge them as orthodox is something that's really complex. Some are clearly far away from a traditional Christian set of teachings, but most, I would say, are quite squarely within the Christian tradition. Finally, there have been a remarkable number of preachers and teachers of Christianity among Africans who their gifts just sort of drove them away from the original missionary training that they'd received. And that's another source of African independent churches. Finally, I just want to talk about the spirit-led creativity and the remarkably resilient Christianity of people who stayed within missionary churches. To this day, most African Christians, probably 75%, belong in mission-founded churches like the Catholic Church. Lutherans, Episcopalians or Anglicans, Methodists, Baptists, every kind of Christianity, Orthodox Christians, every kind of Christianity we might find in Europe and North America is found in Africa, as well as all these independent churches. And there's a remarkable legacy of heroic women and men who served as translators and catechists on the Catholic side as priests and religious, and as ordained ministers in other Protestant churches. these are heroes that African Christians really hold up as models for themselves to the present day. And when you go to Africa, in a great many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you will come across intensely Christian places across the continent, not unlike some of the rural settings in the United States 50 years ago, or parts of Europe before the kind of current late 20th and early 21st century waves of secularization. When I've been in southeastern Nigeria, or around Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, or in parts of southern and western Uganda, or northern Uganda for that matter, I feel like I'm in intensely Christian places. Now, sometimes there are Christianity that's foreign to me as a Catholic priest, Lutherans or Anglicans or Methodists, or even African independent churches in a place like South Africa, where they are very widespread. They're intensely Christian. And for Catholics, that means vocations, as you might imagine, to the priesthood and religious life. For other religious forms of Christianity, all sorts of typical features that people from Europe, North America, or other places in the world would recognize as intensely their own. And this is a legacy of African Christian history. So as a kind of final insight into this history, I just want to say it's a life-giving gift to the current African church. Well, the next 3 sessions, we're going to be discussing the likely future of Christianity in Africa, and I look forward to joining you then.